So, you're planning a wedding in India. It's an incredible time, right? But it also brings up some tricky questions. And one of the biggest ones is about prenuptial agreements. Are they even a thing in India? We're going to dive right into that, get you the straight-up answer, and then talk about a really practical solution that you've probably never even heard of.
Okay, let's not beat around the bush. Let's just tackle the big one right out of the gate. The question everybody asks. Can you get one of those Western-style prenups, the kind you see in movies, and actually have it hold up in India? Is it legally valid?
And the answer, in no uncertain terms, is a simple, direct no. A classic prenuptial agreement just won't fly in an Indian court. And the reason why is actually fascinating. It really gets to the very core of how Indian law sees the entire institution of marriage.
To really get this, we've got to look at the huge difference between how a prenup looks at marriage and how the law itself looks at marriage. They're like two different worlds.
Look at this contrast. It's pretty stark. On one hand, Indian law views marriage as a sacrament, a sacred bond, a huge social institution. But a prenup? It sees marriage as more of a commercial contract, a business deal. It's basically an agreement that's all about planning for divorce. And because of that fundamental clash, the law considers it to be against public policy.
So, okay, if prenups are off the table, why is this such a big deal? Well, it's because when marital disputes do happen, the stakes, both legally and personally, are incredibly high. We're talking about a sharp rise in some really serious legal battles between families, sometimes kicking off just a few months after the wedding.
And in these disputes, there are two really powerful legal tools that often come into play. On the criminal law side, you've got Section 498A of the Indian Penal Code. And then, on the civil law side, you have the Domestic Violence Act.
Now, let's zoom in on Section 498A, because this is where things can get very, very serious and fast. It's what's known as a cognizable and non-bailable offense. What does that mean in plain English? It means an arrest can happen immediately, without a warrant, and getting bail is tough. And get this, it's not just the husband who can be implicated. The complaint can be filed against his parents, his siblings, even his extended family.
All right, now let's flip over to the Domestic Violence Act. The definition of abuse here is incredibly broad. Of course, it covers physical abuse, but it also includes emotional abuse and, this is the one to really pay attention to, economic abuse. And that's where things can get really complicated.
Here's a perfect example of how that works. Think about a big, beautiful wedding. All the expenses, the gifts, the celebrations, all that joy. Well, down the road in a legal dispute, every single one of those things can be twisted and reframed as evidence of an illegal dowry demand. It's wild how that can happen.
And this brings us to a difference that you absolutely have to understand, the difference between Sridahan and dowry. Sridahan is the completely legal and traditional custom of a bride receiving voluntary gifts from her family and friends. But in a dispute, those exact same gifts, a car, some jewelry, cash, can be painted as things the groom's family demanded. And just like that, a beautiful lawful tradition gets turned into a criminal allegation.
Okay, so that all sounds pretty intense, I know. Prenups are out, the risks are high, so what do? Is there a path forward? Well, thankfully, the answer is yes, and it's often called a mutual family agreement.
Now, the critical difference here is everything. A prenup is invalid because it tries to plan for a future divorce. This lawful agreement does the complete opposite. It doesn't say a single word about divorce. Instead, it's laser-focused on simply recording the existing facts of what's happening right now, before and during the wedding.
So how does this actually work? Well, this agreement basically builds a powerful shield for both families, and it all comes down to one simple, incredibly powerful idea: creating undeniable clarity from the very, very beginning.
And the beauty of this thing is how simple it is. First, it just lists out all the wedding expenses and says who paid for what. No confusion. Second, it gets both families to confirm in writing that all the gifts were given voluntarily out of love and affection. And third, it includes a direct, explicit statement that no dowry was ever demanded or even talked about. It's just a record of facts.
So what's the legal secret sauce here? It's that this agreement becomes what's called contemporaneous documentary evidence. Now that sounds like a fancy legal term, but all it means is it's credible proof. Why? Because it was created at the time of the event when everyone was happy and on good terms, not some story invented months or years later after a fight has already started. In a courtroom, this one document can be an absolute lifesaver.
When you really boil it all down, this is what it's about.
This isn't about being cynical or expecting things to go wrong. It's actually about building a solid foundation of trust through total transparency, which can protect both families from years of potential heartache and legal trauma.
So, it leaves us with a really interesting question to chew on. Is it possible that the strongest kind of trust isn't just blind faith, but maybe it's having the courage to be completely open, honest, and documented with each other right from the very beginning? What do you think?